Okay, councillors, it's now 6:30 and welcome to the Planning and Infrastructure Committee of the 28th of November 2013. I can confirm the meeting is being webcast. First item on the agenda is our fire evacuation. So there are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and the side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. As confirmed already, the meeting is being webcast. We have an apologies from Councillor Mitchell, who won't be attending this evening. And for our resignations and replacements, I understand we have... Shall I confirm, or would you like to?
Whichever, Chairman. I'm Councillor David Potter, and I'm substituting for Councillor Gary Watts this evening.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Stuart Parker, substituting for Councillor John Shaw.
Thank you.
I believe I'm substituting for Councillor Miller.
Thank you. And Councillor James.
So it's just to say that Councillor Paul Harvey will be late.
Thank you.
Just out of interest, have you got a substitute for Councillor Mitchell?
No, we gave his apologies and said he won't be attending this evening.
It's just that I know that another Conservative councillor offered to be a substitute tonight and was told that you had full complement.
We did. This was a very late resignation, and I believe that member perhaps has been attempted to be contacted, but we've been unable to invite him. I would also need to appoint a vice chair to the committee. As you can see, that I'm standing in for Councillor Paul Miller. I would like to propose to committee Councillor Mrs. Tucker. Okay, agreed. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're now on agenda item 5, declarations of conflict or interest or whipping decisions. Okay, thank you. There's no urgent items tonight. And onto agenda item number 7, which is confirmation of the minutes. As you'll note from the agenda, the minutes from our meeting of the 14th of November will be confirmed on 30th of January 2014. We've got no public... Oh, yes, Councillor James.
I understand in relation to the minutes that why we haven't got them, but my concern about not having them tonight in relation to some of the actions that are outstanding. Because if they come forward, if you look at the timetable for the local plan, if they come forward in January, we'll move much further on, and I'm just concerned about the outstanding actions. So we asked for certain things, and one of the things I did ask for is a copy of the consultation as one of those outstanding actions, and we was told that we could have a copy of those.
If you've got anything outstanding in terms of information, if you just email me, then we'll send that out directly to you. I think the minutes are now published, so if there is anything in there that you need us as officers to deal with, just come through to us. Happy that we pick those up through that method.
And the copy of the consultation, we was all struggling to get it off the web, and it was very confusing. So.
Yes, we're still putting most of those are on the web now. Some of them have been difficult to find. We've had some people come through on that. All of the copies of the consultations will be behind the reception in Parklands hopefully by the end of this week. It's just taking an absolute age to get them all copied. But once they're there, we'll email all members and let them know.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 8, I've not been notified of any public speakers, so I move on. Are you okay? Right, okay. And agenda item 9, outstanding invitation to the portfolio holder. Okay, thank you. Okay, no referrals from other committees or the council, and no issues referred by the cabinet. So that moves us on to our first report, which will be presented by Joanne Bromley, and I hand over to the officer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the cover report outlines the headline outcomes of the 2012-13 Authority Monitoring Report, which is what used to be called the Annual Monitoring Report. The AMR itself is appended as Appendix 1 to the main report. As you will know, this is something that we report back to you on a yearly basis around this time of year, and we're required to do it through the Town and Country Planning regulations to publish this annually. The report, as you'll see when you've looked through it, outlines some baseline data against performance indicators, and is very useful for all involved, really, because it provides us with information on performance in terms of how we progress with things, impact of current policies, particularly the SAVE policies of the adopted local plan, and also identifies challenges and opportunities facing us and how we can deal with those. It particularly focuses on the housing element, economy, and to a more limited degree infrastructure. Those of you who will know from past experience, this used to have a much wider remit in the past, looking at environmental factors, but those now go to the performance panel, so this is much more focused than perhaps it used to be. So just outlining some of the key things that are in the annual monitoring report, authority monitoring report. It outlines where we are with the local plan and what's happened over the 12-month monitoring period, and that basically brings it up to date to where we were about 2 weeks ago when we went to Planning and Infrastructure Committee. It also outlines progress that's been made with neighbourhood planning, that there were 4 designated areas over that 12-month period, Whitchurch, Bramley, Sherburn St John and Sherford-on-Loddon. And in the 9 months since this period, there's been a further 5 areas designated, so we now have 9. There's a lot of information in here about housing completions. It outlines how housing completions have been particularly low over the monitoring period, only reaching 303 net completions and only 27 affordable units. It then breaks down in more detail elements of those completions, for example, how much has been developed on previously developed land, which was quite high at 65%, the mix of units that were provided, the majority being 2 and 3 bed. It also provides other information on flatted development, densities, things like that. As well as quantitative data, it also includes some quality information and assesses how good the actual developments are in terms of the building for life criteria, and there's some information on that. It also outlines the borough's 5-year land supply position, and there's a schedule at the back of the AMR itself which outlines all the sites which make up our land supply, and as it outlines, and I'm sure many of you are aware, we don't have a 5-year land supply. We only have 3.8 years worth of supply currently. That's just a graphical illustration of the completions compared to other completions since the beginning of the last local plan period, so basically over about a 17-year period, but that's the lowest level.
Councillor James.
You said 3.8 and it's 3.3 in the report. Is that
There's different levels because we monitored this for what the position was as of the 1st of April, which was the end of the monitoring year, but we've updated it as the position of October time because we needed to do that for an appeal. So the most up-to-date position is the 3.8. Turning to the economy, It outlines that there have been low levels of additional employment force place completed over the monitoring period, only about 1,400 square metres, I think, over that period. The employment land available for development has also only increased by a very small amount, 0.1%, both indicators reinforcing the fact that the economy has been quite static over that 12-month period. It also contains information on retail floor space, about 2,700 square metres were completed in that period, but that really only relates to one development on Worting Road, with B&M Home Stores. There's also some limited infrastructure information in terms of applications for change of use and loss of essential services, all of which were policy compliant as outlined in the report. And they just got the recommendation that committee notes the contents of the AMR and makes any comments as suitable.
Okay, thank you. If I could invite the portfolio holder at this stage. Thanks.
Chairman, if I can make some serious comments, but perhaps wrap them up in something a little flippant. When we were last at P&I noted that the old Norden Book of History was dusted out, and we were all being told it was doom and gloom. And I had to remind the committee that following a consultation with members of the public, we were exactly where we'd expect to be at this moment in time. And I think members suddenly realised, oh, that's exactly right. And the great difficulty we had was just the shortage of land supply. Can I just remind you, because I was anticipating, although it might be a slightly shorter reading tonight, that just in case that Norden Book of History was coming out again about our ability to build houses, I did a bit of research just to find out what other authorities have been doing recently. And so I found out that Reading Borough Council has an annual figure to build 572 dwellings per annum. It exceeded this in 2009 to 10. In 2010 to 11 it was 321. 2011 to 12 it was 312. So the last 2 years of the last 3 years that are available, it was short by a significant amount. Winchester City Council has an annual figure of 550 dwellings per annum to be built. In 2009 to 10 it was 286, so half. In 2010 to 11 it rose to 503, so still short. 2011 to 12 it went back down to 315, and the most recent figures are not available. Southampton City Council had a figure of 785 dwellings per annum to be built. In 2009 to 10 it built 525, so approximately 2/3 I suspect. 2010 to 11 791, so just exceeded it. 2011 to 12, back down to 662, and the latest figures are not available. West Berkshire, 525 dwellings per annum is their target. In 2009 to 10, less than half of that at 246. Even lower in 2010 to 11 to 199, and even lower still in 2011 to 12 to 162. It keeps going down like that. It won't build any at all and so Basingstoke and Deans, as you've seen, with the figures of 945 for 2 years, where 1,226 were built, 945 in 2010 to 11 when 772 were built, and 770 the figure was reduced to. That 693 were built, and then when it's gone down, as you know, to 748, we've now fallen to 303. It's very much in the well, in the great scheme of things, similar to other authorities, if not in some cases slightly more successful. But just in case, the one authority that we regularly hear from certain people, I thought I'd tell you about what Oxford City Council have been doing. Their figure was 400 dwellings per annum to be built. In 2009 to 10, despite all the marvellous schemes we've heard about over previous months, 2009 to 10 they built 257, so just over half. In 2010 to 11, they built 200, so exactly half of their target. In 2011 to 12, they built 228, which is just over half their target. And 2012 to 13, they built 213, which is just over half their target, which of course, when we're being encouraged to increase the figure to 50% based upon what Oxford are doing, it doesn't seem to be a good idea to base anything upon what Oxford's doing, because it doesn't seem to be doing it. So I just thought I'd raise that with you and remind the committee that the ability to build for houses to be built and for land to be supplied is dependent on the fact that we live in a free market economy. And whilst we as councillors can influence things to some extent, at the end of the day, the free market economy will determine whether a builder wants to build and the price that they will get for building. Because the economy goes up and down, and as we know, for reasons we don't need to go into, it was down in the year 2000, and it hopefully is going up now, we have a position where it's impossible to build at the rate that we might have wanted to achieve then, and it might be possible to build in the future at a rate that we might like to achieve because the economy has got better. And as we know, that when economies go really, really fast, the ability to build and builders' desire to build perhaps exceeds our desire for them to build on the greenfields around us. So the long and the short of it is just please apply some realism to all of this and perhaps understand that we are subject to market forces that are to a greater or lesser extent outside our control. That's what I wish to say, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to say something at the start of the next item as well.
Councillor James, I think you. Okay, questions for officers. Councillor James.
I've got lots of questions, so you just have to stop me and I'll come back, and I'll come back when you want me to stop, and I'll come into others as well. So, the first question I had is, I suppose it is a question, but in the report you say that the natural built environment will be reported to the performance panel. It's not such a complex report as before. That's on 4.4. The indicators that relate to the natural built environment now go off elsewhere. Would it be possible in a future report to have that as an appendices? I know it's not related to this, but in some ways it's quite good to have a bigger picture, and see that, because obviously that's going off elsewhere. Is that possible? Sorry.
Yes, I don't see why not. Yeah.
In relation to the 303 homes that are built, we've got a 20% affordable build. Then we look at the number of units, the number of build that is under 10 houses. So in relation to our 40% policy, that would mean it doesn't equate to those. So it only equates to those that are over 10. Is that right? And so therefore, the percentage of affordable that we have built is higher than in relation to the 27. What does that equate to?
I don't have a precise number, but yes, you're right that anything under the threshold, so anything 15 units or smaller in Basingstoke Town, wouldn't contribute towards that. It's complicated by the fact that each site has its own different scenarios, so it depends on the actual one. For example, with Park Pruitt, the amount of affordable housing that came forward on this particular phase only relates to an uplift on that particular site. So for each site, it's different. So on that particular site, for example, there's 40% on the uplift, whereas on other sites, if they were given permission a long time ago, like is the case with Park Pruitt, that was approved when it was only a 20% affordable housing requirement. So it's quite complicated because it varies on the individual sites. So I can't give you an individual figure.
Sorry, so you're saying the Park Pruitt relates to a 20% affordable?
On page 35 of 77, where you've got where the affordable housing figures came from, You'll see that 10 came from the southern area of Park Pruitt. So that relates to the 30 odd number that were completed. It was a 20%. So it was an uplift on that. So it's a 40% on the uplift of that. So it depends. Whereas with Faroe and Maldives, that was a 100% affordable scheme. So it was all affordable in that case. The same with the Stratfield Say one. That was 100% affordable. So it really depends on the individual sites. The other one on there is Broadview. On that particular one, only 20% affordable housing was provided rather than 40%, and that was because of viability issues.
I think if you're looking at this in policy terms, it would be useful to understand as a whole, how, in the scrutiny, how we didn't achieve 40%. And obviously you're saying the one in Park Pruitt, and that's a reason, but that would have been good to have that in the appendices to understand, because we're saying now that we have a 40% affordable delivery, which is, we're far short of that. If you looked at it on the 27, it's 9.7, isn't it? So, we're really, I know the cabinet member's been cooing about other authorities not delivering much in relation to housing, but our target is for 40%. And we've delivered 9.7. So I'd like to understand, or if it's not in the report, and I think it's important because this is helping us formulate policy, and this is going to P&I, could we have that, and maybe could you send that to us in a written form as to why it's so, in each site, why we didn't achieve that? Because I think it's important that we understand that in policy terms. If we think that 40 is what we're going to be putting forward as planning authority, I'd like to understand why we haven't achieved that under this plan.
Yes, we can do an audit trail of the sites, of the main sites particularly, like the John Hunt Park Pruitt and Taylor's Farm, ones like that. We can do that.
Sorry, can I just make one point as well? Because we're looking at not full phases at times, although the whole scheme would have achieved 40%, you may only have got a certain amount of that in this particular phase, if you see what I mean. So overall, a scheme may be achieving 40%, but because of the monitoring period in which you're looking at, it may be only part of that. Does that make sense?
And then I think it's really important that that's explained in the report, because I think this is quite stark reading in a sense, and you're doing yourself a disadvantage really, in the sense of you had explained that and you could demonstrate, because it's really worrying, that we've got a 40% and you've achieved less than 10. I need to understand why that is, because is it because of viability? Is it, and I just need to have that picture. And if you had painted that, as you're saying, maybe there's less concern.
Councillor Cubitt.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Just to kick off, the SHLAR used to be part of the annual monitoring report. What now happens to the SHLAR in this new procedure?
Because of where we are with the local plan, the SHLAR has been updated to some degree to inform this report. So opportunity sites within built-up areas that could potentially come forward in the 5-year period have been looked at to inform our 5-year land supply position. But we haven't done the full review of the SHLAR yet because we want to incorporate the outcomes of the representations. So we will be doing that in due course. And we intend to, as soon as we've done that, basically to send that out to members so they can see that, so we can highlight to them what new sites have come forward, which category we think they should go in, what sites have fallen away, what other new sites have come in, and give members an opportunity to comment on that. And we'll do that before the next set of P&Is. So if any issues come up, we can discuss that at the future P&Is.
Thank you. Does that mean that, because this used to go to the Secretary of State, does it still go to the Secretary of State, or is it just for us now?
No, it no longer needs to go to Secretary of State, it just needs to be made public. That's it.
But it does have the SHLAR attached to it, so amendments to the SHLAR are attached to this document, but we don't have that version yet. I mean, so they belong to each other. It's just that you haven't got the SHLAR yet. So when we approve this, we are approving it minus the SCHLAR for now. Yep.
Yes, we've only included the 5-year land supply opportunity site elements. Yes, because we didn't want to come back with just a partial SCHLAR at this stage. We wanted to send that out as a complete version.
Sorry to push this point, but is it an obligation if we have to make it public that it is issued with a SCHLAR? It's not an obligation. Next question relates to the numbers. So on page 16 of 77, and it's probably my memory, but I thought the Cabinet approved last year a number of 594, not 717. Am I having a false memory syndrome? Because in the fourth bullet down, it says that the Cabinet agreed a figure of 770 per annum in 2012. And I thought the whole point was we approved 594 and then it got amended to 748. And I don't have any recollection of a 770 figure. That's my first question.
On the Cabinet of October 2012, there was a range of 730 to 770, but it was agreed that for the land supply purposes, the 770 figure would be used. So that was the position then.
Okay, when was the... Okay, so I'm going on then to talk about specifically page 29 of 77. I just, and 4.7 on page 29. I have a concern which has been raised by a number of my residents in my ward about your inclusion of a figure of 818, and specifically the fact that that's supposedly a reflection of this 5% buffer. And what I've been told is that, and I wonder what your views are on this, is that the MPPF requires that the land, the 5% buffer be there, but not to incorporate it in the number. So what you've done is you've incorporated into the number the 5%, and actually what my residents have done is they've gone through all your data with a fine-tooth comb, and they've worked out that actually if you calculate the buffer on the 748, you only need 100, and I think the number's 187 units over the 5-year period. And what we've got in terms of our land supply at the moment apparently amounts to 250 units. So consequently, my residents feel that it's very odd for you to add dwelling numbers into the figure, i.e. making it 818, because to a lay person, they might misinterpret your data and have it suggested that we actually believe we need to build 818. And secondly, it suggests there's a shortfall where they don't think that you've got your numbers correct. Could you comment on that, please?
The 818 reflects two things, really. It reflects the fact that we've undersupplied over the last 2 years. So that doesn't get lost, it gets added to the remaining requirement. So a proportion of that is added each year. So that puts the figure up from one point of view. Then you have the 5% that's added. The MPPF is quite clear that that needs to be added, or 20% depending on how the authority has performed over recent years. That is standard practice, and that's something that's been accepted in recent appeals across the country and also here.
Well, okay, that leads to two questions. We over-delivered by 500 units on a couple of years, and when I asked for those oversupplies to be incorporated in the 5 years, you said we weren't allowed to do it. So why is it when we oversupply, we can't reduce the next year's delivery, but when we undersupply, we have to include it? It doesn't make any sense to me.
You generally would include oversupply or undersupply if it's within that plan period. However, the figure of the 730 to 770, or 748 as it is now, starts at the period of 2011. So all the oversupply that came before that was a different plan period. So you can't take in, that's been taken into account when you come up with the 748 figure in the first place. That's already taken into account.
Who chose that the plan period should start at 2011 and not the 2007, which was what it theoretically should have done when our previous plan expired?
The current adopted plan runs up to 2011. So that was that plan period, 96 to 2011. then the new plan will cover 2011 up to 2029, and all the modelling work, etc., that Edge have done and others started at 2011.
Okay, and then just on the buffer, just to repeat, because I hear you say that we're required to do 5%, but what I've been told is that we only have to demonstrate we've got the land. We don't have to demonstrate the numbers. So therefore, it's very peculiar and perverse for us to add the numbers into the numbers of to add it to 748. We just say we've got to build 748, and we have to have land identified for the 5%. We don't have to roll the numbers into the 748 to demonstrate the 5%. That's what I've been told that the MPPF explicitly states.
I can see what you're saying, but I think we have to agree to disagree, because that's generally what standard practice is, that you would always include that. I said, and that's what inspectors and others are looking for. That's what they expect.
Thank you, John. I mean, the only thing is, having been a councillor now for 6 years, I do feel that very often we seem to gold standard requirements when it doesn't suit the interests of our residents, and we seem not to gold standard things when there is an interest in our residents. And I would suggest that in the interests of our residents, which we know overwhelmingly what their views are, is it would be far more beneficial to us to retain the 5% in land. We know that there's 187 units that would be required over the period for 5%. We know that there is land available for 250 units. Therefore, why would we put a requirement for more units when it's not required? So that's my comment from that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gardner, please.
Thank you, Joan. I went through the report, and it's a fairly bald statistical document. Frankly, it states that was the target, that's what we achieved. To make it more useful, would it be possible to actually include forecasts for the following year? And could this be taken on board for future reports?
Do you mean just in relation to housing, or more generally?
More generally, in terms of the targets we are setting throughout.
We can look to do that. I mean, we do that already with the housing trajectory. We say what we expect to come forward in the future, but we can look at the actual targets and things as well. Yeah.
I think that would be useful. My other comment was really that a monitoring report in isolation is not necessarily a terribly useful document unless you actually have some proposals about what you're going to do to redress the deficiencies. Though this would actually come back to us through other reports, I assume.
That's correct, yes. I mean, we take this into account, obviously, when we're formulating policy. We'll take it forward in the evolving local plan.
Councillor Leake.
Thank you. A lot of minor comments. On page 7, there's not as much a criticism as a request for future years. It took me some time to realise that it was the comments related to 2012-13, but we keep talking about currently. Rather than use the word currently, it would have been much more helpful to say during that period, or because otherwise it gives you the wrong impression. Because currently we are working on more sites than are referred to in paragraphs 5.3 and 5.4, because as we all know, Merton Rise is going up at a pace, and Merton Rise doesn't even get a mention. So I think the word current, if we didn't have currently, and it would actually help enormously, because it isn't current, it's what was happening then. On page 20, there's a rather curious statement which says the borough has a higher proportion than the national average of children and middle-aged residents and a lower than average percentage of pensioners. However, 80% of all population growth in the borough over the next 16 years is projected to occur within the age groups over 65. Well, they're about the only group that don't create more population. We're here now, and hopefully we will stay for some time. I think the population growth, in my view, comes from either birth or from immigration. It doesn't come from those who are already living here. So I think I know what you mean. There will be a higher proportion of those over 65, but that's not population growth. So if I could just, I do think that needs amending. On page 21, the last bullet point, it talks about the government's intention around enforcing a more stringent control on national immigration. I think it means international immigration. National would suggest that we're going to have a battle with Mr. Salmon, or whatever his name is, and stop the Scots coming here. So I hope you would agree with that one. 20 on page 24. Homes built on previously developed land. 40% of all new homes to be accommodated on previously developed land. I mean, realistically, that's not something we're ever going to be able to achieve in Basingstoke and Dean, because we've all said we don't have that much brownfield land. I know we've got the Kingsclere Road site, but there aren't many other major sites coming forward, and certainly not within the local plan. So it seems to me that, you know, we have something there which is not achievable anyway, but you might like to comment on that. Should I just do my last few? Page 28. Oh, sorry, there was that was another of your currents. I haven't highlighted them all, but right in the first paragraph, only one large-scale greenfield site is currently under construction, namely Sherfield Park. Well, that's not actually true. And page 29, the trajectory. You see, we have a trajectory, which I find struggling to say, but in my view that's just unrealistic. I mean, we've had 303 houses this in the year 2012-13. I don't think any of us expect that that trend is going to continue, otherwise there's going to be a major crisis. And we're projecting forward to sort of 399 houses in 2019-20, but we are hopefully producing a plan which will enable us to produce considerably more houses. So I'm not sure that that table really helps us in any way, shape or form. I mean, it just looks as though we've given up the ghost. And I don't think any of us have. So there is going to be growth there, unless I've misunderstood the table. You know, we have to find the additional sites, and that's what the local plan's all about. And there will be additional housing, I'll bet you bottom dollar. And I'm sure we all agree on that, because the government wants more. So I comment on that. And then page, 29, and then page 52, my last one, you'll be pleased to know, which is one of the charts showing. In fact, it's at the first page of Appendix 2, and this may apply to others. But I think we're being unduly pessimistic about the speed of development on sites such as north of Merton Rise, and therefore also some of the other sites. I mean, the way they're putting up Merton Rise, it'll probably be finished next year, for God's sake, never mind in 2020-21. It is going. So I think there's a, you know, it seems to be rather pessimistic in what we're anticipating, and I don't think that's realistic. I don't think it helps people. Anyway, those are my comments. And as the portfolio holder says, we are where we are because of external circumstances. None of us expected there to be 300 houses built last year. I'm sure if we look back 2 or 3 years, we would have been projecting a much higher number. Hopefully it will go up, and we will get the affordable housing that Ms. James would like to see, and we would like to see. Thank you.
Can I just come back on the trajectory point, just for clarification really? In 4.10, on the page 30, it says there that the local plan sites are not included, because at this stage we can't do... That's how you have to do your trajectory. In terms of the guidance, you can't include that at the moment because those sites cannot be taken as allocations at this stage, which is why that caveat's written in there.
Right, if I may just come back. They may not be included, but as we all know, the developers are putting the sites forward with schemes, and they're going to happen anyways, whether they're in the local plan or not. So, to me, this is painting a rather negative picture when we know it's not what will happen in reality. But that's the way you have to present it. That's the way you have to.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Just so I understand page 17 and that graph, does that trajectory, does that include the sites that we've had that have come forward early, that were in the local plan, that have got through on appeal? So
It includes north of Marnell Park, because that now has a permission, but it doesn't include any other local plan sites at this stage because they don't have permission and they can't be counted as part of the supply at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Is it on the same point, yeah?
For example, I'm going to call it the wrong name and Councillor Leap will get furious with me, but I can never remember which one it is. It's Kiln Farm or it's not Kiln Farm or whatever it's called. Is that what you call it? Okay. So that's approved, so that's in. Okay, I completely agree with Councillor Leak. It's a nonsense not including the sites that we've already approved in the Cabinet and in the Council, so I find it perverse.
I mean, just to clarify, you absolutely can't do that in terms of land supply position. And for those of you who've attended some of the appeals that have been going on, the Marnell Park and the Kennel Farm inquiry, those particular points are very strongly made by us and developers in terms of challenging our 5-year supply. So Joanne has put forward the case as to how it has to be done in terms of supply, and you can only put things in supply once they are either allocated formally, so you've got an adopted plan, or a planning permission is granted and being enacted.
I might say, therefore, that trajectory must be based on these tables here, and I would argue that if I just take the very first one, Merton Rise will happen much quicker than that, and that would have an impact on the early years, and so the trajectory could look totally different. But look, you're the experts. I'm only a.
I agree that there's an element of judgment within these things, as there always is, but this information is based on a number of sources of information, including the actual development rates that the developers have said themselves, which we are obliged to take into account when we're looking at land supply, because that's what an inspector would look at. And we do change that, and we up them in some cases if there's a case for doing so, based on past rates. But you need to take these things into account. These figures are agreed with Hampshire County Council, who do this across the board, obviously for county, and apply certain approaches to doing this.
Thank you. I'll move on to Councillor Potter, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Ignoring the portfolio holder's, mildly humorous introduction, you seem to be saying, I think, that we're performing about as badly as other comparable authorities in this area, so we can all relax about this. I'm glad to say the officers are not quite taking that view. Looking at page 11 of 77, paragraphs 610 and 611, where you're talking about acting proactively and seeking to take steps which will encourage development. Can I just ask, in terms of the actions which are listed under 611, do we have any evidence and do we have any data about land banking by developers, simply holding on to sites at this current time where planning approvals exist, purely because of the sort of market force arguments that I think the portfolio holder alluded to and we all recognise? So that's point one. The other one that I just wanted to raise an issue around, if I may, on bullet point 4, we talk about renegotiating Section 106 agreements where appropriate. Renegotiation would only mean renegotiating down, I think. It's unlikely to be an improvement on what was secured originally. In terms of that action, do we have a council policy on this? Can I be reminded of that? I'm not aware that we've actually agreed in principle that we would be supportive of that type of renegotiation on 106 agreements which are part of a legal agreement in terms of that planning approval. Can I ask the officers for information on that, please?
Just in response to the first point about land banking, any sites with planning permission are included in the schedule at the back, so you can see exactly what everyone has, and we've come to a conclusion about whether those sites are unlikely to come forward or not. That takes that into account.
Just in terms of the renegotiation point, and some of the councillors will know this better than I, but when I think developers do request any renegotiation on Section 106, and I don't believe there have been many, board members are alerted to that, I think, through the single issue panel. Councillor Watts would probably put me right on that. But there is a new clause, I think, in government guidance now, so that after a certain period of time, it is their right to come back and say if they've got viability issues to renegotiate, and we are required to consider that.
Just on that point, as I pointed out in full council not long ago, we are entitled as board members to be consulted to any change, but we're not entitled to have been consulted in the first place about what the agreement was.
Councillor James, did you want to ask a question? You are next as well, yes.
Can I just pick up on that point on 106? You're saying that we are told, or ward members are told of renegotiation, but I think it has to be much broader than that, because there are significant sites within wards and has an impact on all of us. And I think, and I keep raising this, I believe that we should all be told of any renegotiation, and it isn't just down to those ward members. And I have asked as the leader of the Labour group that I'm informed of those, and I haven't been, and I do think it's something we should do as good practice. Could you just, also going on to the one about the schedule at the back and land banking, could you give us an example of where there isn't a land bank at that schedule?
I'm not sure I understand what the question is. Are you clear on?
In terms of whether a developer has got permission and they're not developing out their land, there aren't any. No, in this case, anyone with permission, they are bringing them forward, unless there's a particular reason, and there's only a very few of those. Like, for example, Basingstoke Hospital, where they have permission for 65. They've now got a change of approach to that site, and they've said openly that site's not going to come forward. So that's 65 units has now been put in the unlikely column. There is no kind of obvious land banking.
So following on from in relation to 6.11, the other actions, encouraging the renewal of planning applications by approaching individual applicants where existing permissions are due to expire. Are there any examples of that? Or, and is that something that we would want to do, or do we want to just renew it, or would we want them to have go back again and start again?
I don't have any examples of it. Yes, that is something we would want to do if it's a suitable site and a suitable scheme. Obviously, it depends on the details. In some circumstances, policies may have changed, so they would need to go back through certain processes. It depends.
So we wouldn't really want to renew it. We'd want a different application, wouldn't we? It's not a renewal of an application.
It's a renew, but then, yes, update as well in light of the new policy framework and any other issues that have come to light.
Can I ask about the Building for Life, the table? There's been an 11% reduction in achieving Building for Life assessment, and I understand you explain why that is. Can you talk through, that's in relation to 5.11, and you relate it to the phasing and Park Pruitt?
the way that Building for Life works is it doesn't necessarily just look at units that were completed in the monitoring period. It's where if a whole larger phase is completed in that period, then the whole phase is looked at. So in the case of Park Pruitt, both the core area and the southern area were taken into account, which was over 800 units, so it was the majority of units that were looked at. What that's basically saying through those paragraphs is that those sites were given outline permission back in '97 and then reserved matters permission in, I think, 2004. So that was some time ago, and before the Building for Life criteria were used in this council. It wasn't until 2009 that we started using them.
So it's nothing to be worried that it's halved. You know, do we have to be concerned, or in relation to this monitoring report?
Only in the fact that obviously in the past the quality has perhaps been average, and we want to do something about that. And as the report outlines, a number of steps have been put in place since those applications were given approval. And we've seen, for example, like Taylor's Farm, which was given permission in 2008, that got a good rating. So it's to make sure we monitor it and make sure there's an upward trend in the future.
And if you look at the table that shows that, and I can't remember where it is in the report, we're still not it's a lot of average, isn't it? And that's what's concerning. And if you look at what this criteria meets in relation to sustainable development, I think it's a key indicator, and you know, I think it's essential that we hit above the target, really. And how can we do that? And obviously, you know, how are we going to? You said it's going to feed into policy. It's just how are we going to monitor that in the future?
I mean, the council has put a number of things in place already with the new local plan policies from 2006. We've got Design SPD. There's also the Design Quality Initiative and the Design Charter that's adopted. There's all these issues obviously now need to be taken into account. There's more focus on design, and each year we will be able to monitor the impact of that in terms of what's actually delivered on the ground.
Can I refer to 5.2 of the report, and I think this is a really interesting one. It talks about the significant advances that have been made in the progress of the local plan, accumulating in consultation and a pre-submission of the local plan between August and October 2013. I mean, I talk about rewriting history. I mean, are we actually saying it's been a successful process to date? If you look at the timetable within this report, and then you look at the timetable of the last annual monitoring report, we're 12 months behind what we said we were going to be on the last annual report. I mean, talk about changing, you know, I mean, that's an amazing rosy picture you're painting there. I wonder if you can just give us a feel of what you think.
I think that's trying to reflect the fact that that plan has moved on some way in the last 12 months, that it has gone through a pre-submission. It's got council resolution. We haven't had that ever, certainly not in my time. So it's all those processes that have been gone through and actually going out to public consultation, which we haven't done in recent years as well. So it's monitoring the fact that we are achieving on those things and taking the plan forward rather than it not being through those processes in that timescale.
But we also had, at the last P&I meeting, a report that said that, you know, our chief executive has gone out for legal advice because this draft plan was going to be illegal. We also have a partner, the county council, a significant partner, saying that our practices were illegal and that you know that they would take action against us, and lots of other authorities. I mean, I don't mind reports, but they have to be, you know, let's paint the real picture. This is incredible. Talk about rose-tinted glasses. I mean, it isn't significant advances. We now actually have another delay. We don't have a 5-year land supply, and we now have, you know, in relation to the last report that we had, we have a 12-month delay. That's not a significant advances. On the last timetable in the last report, we're 12 months behind where we should be, and that isn't a significant improvement, I don't think.
Okay. Do you have any further questions, or shall I
Do? Yeah, sorry. It's picking up on what Onali said in relation. It's sort of on 6.6, and the figures, the additional figure, there's 187 required units, but it doesn't talk about. We've now had lost a site, a county site, so we're going to have to identify further more sites. And it doesn't talk about the loss of windfall, that we're not about to include windfall in there now. Is that the case, or am I misunderstanding this section?
Neither of those issues are really relevant to the annual monitoring report, which sets out our 5-year land supply position. You can still include windfall in that, and unallocated sites are not included anyway, so those issues don't matter at this stage.
But in relation to the figure that we come up with, the housing number figure, we can't include windfall.
As we outlined at the last committee, the guidance now is saying, the MPPF says that you can include windfall in the first 5 years. The new guidance that's come out from government and planning practice guidance is saying that you shouldn't be including windfall after that, so the 6 to 15-year period.
I'm trying to find it in the book. It is in relation to windfall, the section on windfall, and where it says, where is it? 16. That 218 of the net completed residential units were windfall.
Can I just what page you're on, please?
Sorry, 16 of 77. That's incredibly high, isn't it, in relation to the work that we've done on P&I in relation to housing numbers?
And that's saying that 218 were on allocated sites. It was 85 on the windfall. That's sites that are not allocated.
And how does that compare with what we've allocated for in the local plan?
You can't really compare that because it's two different things that you're looking at there. I mean, the reason why this section's been added is to help us justify our small site windfall allowance. So it's to calculate how many small sites came forward this year, and we've done it in previous years because we've got 50 units a year in the land supply. So this is to help justify that figure moving forward.
And in relation to page 26 of 77, and it's talking about the affordable housing or the housing. This is a section that I was talking about in relation to the 242 units. And if you look at that percentage against affordable, because obviously we can't include sites of 10 or more units. I just want to understand, looking at the page on page 35, referring back to what we've actually delivered now. My concern in that commentary there on 35 of 4.16, effectively, and I suppose that's what the cabinet member was saying, oh, there's nothing we can do, it's all a national problem and everyone else has got the same problem. But the reality is, if you look at what the reasons for the failing of the delivery of what we've not achieved, there's lots of things here that we should have done. You know, and in a sense, I think that as a committee we need to look at 4.16 and I would like us in policy terms to understand what are we going to do differently and what can we bring back to this committee to ensure that we achieve the 40%, because we've failed in delivering the 40% affordable housing, and it's almost as if, oh, it's a national problem, but it wasn't as if it was, we didn't know it was coming. It was coming down the line, we all knew it was going to happen, and it's almost nothing was done. And don't forget, this has to be set against a context that we have millions of pounds and thousands of pounds in the bank. And in relation to our affordable housing programme, we have thousands of pounds that sat in a reserve for over 3 years that we could have used to top up some of these sites to deliver affordable housing. And I would like us, as a piece of work, to scrutinise that, to really understand why, in relation to those sites, we haven't achieved, what we could have done differently. Is that something we could do as a committee?
Just to say, I think Joe set out earlier, the likelihood is that some of those sites would have achieved the 40%. In terms of the other points, I think that they probably are wider remit and don't fit within the planning and infrastructure committee, and they're probably more for the housing committee.
Can we refer that back to housing committee then, to ask them to look at, as a piece of work, of the sites from that year, why they didn't achieve 40% and what we could have done differently, and then learn from that for the following year, particularly in light of the amount of money that we have sitting in the reserves that we could use to spend. Can we ask the Housing and Environment to pick this up as a piece of work?
Is this something the committee's minded to do? I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I mean, personally, I'm considering, it talks about the whole range of different factors here. Some of them, obviously, that are out of our control. But is this something that committee's minded to do? Councillor Leake, yes, please.
I mean, interestingly, at our last performance panel meeting, and my God, there are plenty of references to what the performance panel does in this paper, we did highlight the fact that 714 million, I think it is. Do I mean? 714,000. Oh, where am I? 14,000. Anyway, a lot of that. 714,000 of Section 106 money relating to affordable housing as a result of, I think, the Weber's garage site, has been sitting there for a long time, and I think we did ask that to be investigated. Were you in the performance panel? We did, didn't we? No. We have. Yeah, sorry. Yes, that was my colleague. We did ask for that to be looked at because it did seem odd that the number of affordable houses was very low, and we were sitting on all this money. So where that goes to, I'm not quite sure. So, but I'm happy to support it, that it should go somewhere. Somebody should be asking the question, why have we got 714,000 pounds that hasn't been used?
Councillor James.
At the same time, that's just one pot of money. We also have the housing reserve, which is a significantly larger pot of money that's been sitting there for 3 years. So it's not. We've had the resources. We've known that we know what the national context is. We've had some sites. What is it that we could have done differently, or maybe we couldn't have done? But we need to understand why we failed in delivering and very seriously failed in delivering our target.
Well, could I just say that I hope that the next performance panel will have someone there who's able to explain it, but I would have thought it would be either the head of service or the cabinet member for housing rather than anything to do with the OSCOM.
Councillor Potter.
I mean, it's just a question of timing within your procedures tonight, Chairman, isn't it, really? I mean, if you'll accept the proposition now, I think we can work around the mechanics of who actually would do that piece of work, or whether you want to come back to this at the end of the discussions over this report. But clearly, when it comes to the issue of affordable housing and our failure to deliver anywhere near what we would have hoped to do, when it comes down to it, it is a question of developers, quite frankly, saying that isn't viable in many situations, and we are in a position as a local authority, if we choose to supplement and support and subsidise that process. We can do that. And it's a question of how we do that, and I'm not entirely sure whether housing environment's entirely appropriate, or as Councillor Watt says, perhaps it might go in a slightly different direction, but certainly the principle of looking at the reasons and what we can do to support initiatives which take us nearer that target figure has to be worthwhile.
If I just could come back on that, I mean, we have a process which was recommended by a single issue panel for member involvement where developers do say that it's not viable. And I think we're told at audit governance accounts there haven't been any recent cases.
Just on the points that you're raising, I'm wondering whether some of them are already picked up by the motion that was agreed at the last Housing Environment Committee. And there is a number of areas of work that were asked to be looked at, and there's an officer report coming back on that. And I'm just wondering whether there's anything missing from that you're talking about.
That's going forward, but this is really, in a sense, and you can link to that, but this is scrutiny, and I think that what we need to do, and we are an overview and scrutiny committee, and we need to scrutinise, and this is an essential piece of work we need to look at. Which areas do we want to scrutinise to ensure that next year, when this policy comes forward, that we're happy with it? And what it says is this informs policy, and it's essential that we look at the indicators in this. And some of them are quite stark, and the one that's really stark is the delivery of housing and the delivery of affordable housing, and it's so far removed from our target that we really need to have an understanding of that. And we can't just note this report. I think it would be very remiss of us to do that. We need to do something with it. We can't just say we note it and we're told by officers that it will be looked at in policy. We need to say, how is it going to be looked at in policy and who is going to do that, and we would like to see that. And it's a piece of work. But I think we need to do it against all of those pots of money we've got in this borough sitting around but we're not used. And I think that it's misleading, that section that says that there's a national context why we failed on this. I don't think that's acceptable.
Okay, can you just give me a couple of moments? I just want to... Okay, I was just confirming, because I obviously we're sitting on housing environment as well, and I know the agenda for that is full pretty much until we're going to be looking into probably February, perhaps even March. And we know the Planning and Infrastructure Committee is equally full, and I'm not sure that it sits right here. Perhaps it is better for housing environment to view this, if anybody. I'm just minded if it gets referred to committee, because there seems to be a general feeling that people would like to have this explored. There's an understanding that this might not come back until a relatively later point when they can fit it in amongst their agendas. And I think if that's acceptable, perhaps we can refer to the committee. Councillor Leake.
I don't think it's the role of this committee to actually discuss how we spend the pots of money. It just so happened the performance panel actually found that there was this particular pot, and we did ask why it hadn't been invested or spent. But that's not the role of this committee. We need to check that we are achieving the right level of affordable housing, but it's for others to actually decide where it is actually spent. So performance panel did serve its proper function in identifying that the money hadn't been spent, but after that it's up, I'm sure, to housing rather than here. So I wouldn't support it coming back further in case investigation at this, for this.
Thank you. One last point, Councillor James. Thank you.
Well, on that point, I'm saying, you're right. The performance panel did identify that, and it was a good piece of work. And we are saying, or I'm saying here, I have real concerns in relation to the affordable housing, that we haven't achieved that from a planning point of view. So, is our planning policy right? If it is right, and we're being told by officers it's right, what has gone wrong within housing? It is a piece of work we need to look at, and I think it's an important piece of scrutiny against the factors of funding and this pots of money that we have. It clearly says in 4.16, one of the factors that excuses why we didn't deliver the 40% housing, it says the overall reduction in public subsidy. But we had funding, as Councillor Link said, and as I'm saying, in relation to housing reserve.
Okay.
So I want to
think,
understand that.
Yeah, so I don't mean to cut you off. I just think that I think there's a general agreement. I think there are the maps coming up. Obviously, we can discuss policies with something that would appear in there.
I just think in terms of we're mixing two particular elements here. I think in terms of the local plan perspective, we brought forward all the information and evidence on why we should be achieving 40%, and that's clear. We've got a clear feeling from committee as to that's the way we should be going. That's the policy we administer at the moment. I think Joe set out why it would look like you're not achieving that against this in that particular monitoring year, but I think we probably are achieving the 40% where it's on historic permissions. I think when it comes to the point on money and how you might spend, where you might spend reserves, etc., that's not for this committee, and that is the particular issue that I think you're asking that would be referred to somewhere else. As part of, I would say, that broader motion that's already been dealt with by Housing and Environment.
Councillor Gardner.
Can I suggest that we refer it back to the relevant portfolio holder as a piece of work that requires to be done with some urgency, and let it be brought forward to the appropriate committee at the right time?
Naturally, I don't know what their agendas are, so I mean, I think perhaps the request could be made, but whether how urgent their time can be placed upon it, that I don't know. It was something we were discussing a range of options, so we was already discussing that as a range of options to explore this further. Is the committee like-minded to do that? I think it would tease out some of the answers at the very least. Well, I think it's very difficult to comment unless we have the... In terms of urgency, if we were to put a timescale on it, I mean, should we say realistically something like mid-January, or are we looking at what's your indication of urgency? Can I refer it to the portfolio holder, and we will confirm the response? And I will go. I don't want to spend too much or all night on this particular subject. I think there's a general feeling that we want to explore something, and there's a feeling that we can refer it to the portfolio holder. Has everybody agreed? I think everybody's generally agreed on this. I think I'd like to move on. I'm going to come back to you. I do have Councillor Parker. From what I understand, did you want to clarify what you understand?
What are you doing? Are you referring it to the... What are you referring? Because what we have the ability in this, under the agenda, to refer to other committees or the council. We don't have the ability in this committee to refer to the cabinet member. So and that's item 10 of the agenda. We do refer, and housing refers to us. What are we doing? Because it is really...
My understanding is what seems to be the general agreement around the table is that you want to refer a question or a piece of work to the portfolio holder, and I would assume it would be for housing, to investigate the money that is sitting in this particular reserve and the money that has been sought for affordable housing through Section 106, and to make some progress on how that's going to be used and how that might deliver affordable housing.
What we said is, if you look at this monitoring report, regardless of what you're saying it isn't saying, but you think it is saying, it says that we didn't achieve our 40%. No, but that's what the report says. The report says it.
I don't. I
And so
think
what we
there's
need to
some
do
different-
is-
if I could get Andrew Hunter to explain that point again, 'cause I'm not exactly sure that's
We're
that's what
asking
it's
why
saying.
the cabinet member why it didn't achieve that.
I think all the monitoring report is saying is how much in that monitoring period affordable housing was delivered. It's not saying that 40% wasn't met. It's just simply saying that in that particular monitoring period of those units which were completed, those are the number that are affordable. As I explained earlier, some of those may sit within much larger planning applications, where 40% could have been achieved, and it's just that you're catching the last part of a phase where the affordable housing was presented and provided in the previous monitoring period. So it's not saying that there's a failure in this particular point. It's just simply giving you the facts as to how much was provided in that period.
We'll go to Councillor Harvey and then Councillor Gardner, and then I will move on from this. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. May I first apologise for my lateness attending the committee and would appreciate some infrastructure spending on South West Trains. I think that would be a good start. I apologise for my lateness. I don't think that's very fair, Chair. I'm happy to wait. I've got no issue. It was on this point. I'm happy to come back to this point if you are, when you're ready, in turn. Are you sure? Okay, I'm happy to. And what I was going to say, Chair, is there's three elements to this, having read the paper and having looked at where we are. There's an issue to do with land banking and delivery rates, because is that an issue? Is it not an issue? We've got a delivery rate set against a percentage, and the planning policy element to it. And I don't know whether you've covered this element, but where does that sit in the existing planning policy in terms of delivery and the context of not only sites, not only developers bringing development forward, but also in terms of Section 106 agreements and renegotiations of certain 106 agreements. As long as we can capture that element with the cabinet member, and that element of the report, it's not just about the money. The money
I must
isn't the
say,
only
much of
element.
this has been dealt with, and I think the point earlier is there was a request to refer this subject to the committee. I think we note these committees are. This isn't the wrong one. Housing environment is perhaps too busy, so there was a request for urgency. And probably the quickest way you're going to get a response on this is that we refer it to the portfolio holder. So I'm inclined, if you want to take a couple of moments to word exactly what you want, or what it is you're hoping to get out of this, please take the time. I'll move on to the next questions, and then we can move on from this, because I think there's a general agreement around the committee that it's something they'd like to explore, and I think we have a mechanism for it, but perhaps it's just about getting it right in the wording. Would anybody want to continue with this? I know there was a couple of people who wanted to speak, or can I move on to Councillor Parker, who's been waiting very patiently for his questions? You're next after Councillor Parker, thank you. Councillor Parker.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I'd like just to ask a very simple question on page 24 of 77, which is the Building for Life assessments, which it states that this is a looking back data. It says 20% is the target, and I couldn't see anything within the report, and it's a point made by Councillor Gardner. Has the target changed?
The target hasn't changed from the previous year, no.
Thank you for that. What I'd like then to refer to is page 41. Where we're looking at planning permission granted for loss of sites in employment use. Now, this refers to the data, I understand, is coming from applications that have been made for planning permission. There's now an increasing trend within the town centre map for office buildings to be converted to residential. and this is not requiring planning permission. This is just now under the new rules, the government national rules, is for notification of works to be carried out. So I want to ask is, how are we then going to monitor that particular loss in future calculations, as they won't be applying for planning permission?
This is an issue that has been identified by Hampshire County Council and ourselves in looking at annual monitoring. And because we get notification of those changes, they will still be monitored. They will be included in the schedules about changes of use to employment or elsewhere, so they will be captured.
For purposes just of, if I can then just look at page 50, and it's just a very small point for purposes of a request for any future report which has some quite incredible technical detail. Could the glossary and the use of classes of planning permissions and planning uses come earlier in the paper rather than after the tables? It might assist understanding when you're looking at the relevant tables. It's a positive suggestion out of the evening, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cubitt.
So just a couple of other issues. On table 2, there used to be a reference to the...
What page, please, Councillor?
Sorry, table 2, page 24 of 77. There used to be a reference to the neighbourhood plan producing an additional 150 houses, and I just wondered why that's no longer on that table as a performance indicator, that the neighbourhood plans would be delivering houses.
That was never a performance indicator in the actual AMR. That's more in the land supply schedules of the local plan itself.
Would it be beneficial for us to have it as a performance indicator?
Moving forward, when we've got an adopted new plan, the indicators in here will change to reflect those new policies. So at that point, yes, that would be a useful indicator.
Okay, and then just finally then, I have a problem with this report in that I would like to formally record that if you're going to treat the 770 figures on page 28 of 77 in the detail that you've done, when that's been superseded by a full council approval, I would prefer for that data to have been incorporated in a paragraph and that the table be applied to the current figure, which is 748. And at the very least, 4.7 should have produced a table that mirrors the one that refers to an historic amount that was approved, because the figure we, the council, approved was 748. What I'd also like to formally, I would like formally recorded in the minutes is that I do not accept your figure of 3,128 as the supply for the next 5 years. I don't accept your pessimistic outlooks in the appendices, and you said that the only site that was not going to be taken forward was the Basingstoke Hospital, but if you go drill down through the tables, there's, for example, and you may have an answer to this, you may not, I don't know, is, for example, this Bunyan, where is it? Bunyan, where is, I've lost it now. Bunyan Place is 200 houses, which has just disappeared. And when you look at the total number of allocated supplies that have already got planning applications, there's 5,284. So I just don't accept the figure that you've got, which I think is far too pessimistic, and I don't accept the emphasis that you've placed on an historic approved number, and therefore I would like to formally record that I'm not prepared to, Councillor Cubitt is not prepared to note your monitoring report. I would actually like to say I don't accept it. Thank you.
Yep, Councillor Parker.
Oh, sorry, did you,
Thank
do
you very
want to
much.
come back?
No, Councillor Parker.
I would like just to make reference to page 44 of 77 and just ask if table 15 is sort of adhering to sort of statutory requirement for us to list this information. Because if you look at on table 15 where it talks about 87 Flaxfield Road as being a loss of essential services, well, yes, I suppose technically we can say it was a retail unit, and now it's no longer a retail unit because planning permission's been given to it to be a residential unit, but it's been empty for 9 years. It was owned by the local authority and we haven't been able to sell it for retail purposes, so effectively things have changed, and it's perhaps in my view it tends to it might fall into the realms of data for the sake of providing data and not actually reflecting the reality of what's happening in the street, and there are a couple of other such pieces in that same sort of area where we've had one unit in Cliddeston Road converted from offices to residential, and another one from residential to offices, and if you sort of it tends to be sort of life going on, and I'm not sure whether it might be possibly a waste of officer time listing all of this information unless we are required under a statutory obligation, or maybe so that it's more relevantly informative that there is some sort of note against something like 87 Flaxfield Road that justifies why actually in the end we had to allow planning permission for it to be changed from retail to residential.
There's not a statutory duty for us to monitor this. We do it because we've got a policy on the loss of essential services. So it helps us to show whether there's a continuing need for that policy, whether it's being used and used effectively for exactly the sort of schemes that you're talking about. And if it's not effective, so we're losing services that we don't want to lose. So it helps with monitoring the effectiveness of that particular policy.
Councillor Parker.
I'm not going to come back on that. I can't see how a property that's been vacant for a good number of years is a loss if it's now actually being lived in.
Okay, so I believe there's been sort of questions and comments, so I think we've been capturing that as we go along. Before we move on to that stage, are you ready to comment on your wording for this point?
If I may, Chairman, I mean, this is purely for the formal aspect of recording it on the webcast, and obviously I drafted something on the principle of, why use 10 words when 100 will do, and I'll pass it across to officers if they're interested in this in due course. But could I read it out and see whether it is in accord with what people have been saying, and then we'll go from there. But P&I notes a significant decrease in the completion of affordable housing, currently representing only 9% of the total. Despite assumptions that affordable housing completions will improve into the next monitoring period, P&I requests the portfolio holder to speedily, undertake a piece of work identifying issues giving rise to the low level of delivery of affordable housing. Thereafter, to action the delivery of affordable housing using the allocated reserve funds of the Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council to support the established and agreed target of 300 affordable units per annum. Now, I know that's somewhat extended beyond what it needs to be. We could précis that, but that's the thrust of it. I think that's the word. I could, John, thank you. Which one do you want?
Could you say the portfolio holder for housing rather than just portfolio holder.
I would, thank you. And
Do you want to 106 in there?
no. But so if I might say, Chairman, I mean it's just the context of this. I mean I think the outline of that was, I'm looking around as I say this, but broadly what we were saying we wanted to happen in terms of action, and if it can be streamlined in wording and made better, absolutely no problem with that.
Councillor Tucker, Mrs. Tucker.
I just thought we ought to refer to the fact that I can't remember how much money that you've said that we've got in 106 money. Yeah, I mean whether we should refer to that we know this kind of funds have been sitting there rather than just general funds. I thought, well, however many pots, yeah, so long as we have, I think it's a good idea to name them.
Yeah, I mean, it's not normal for people to add to the words I use. Normally I try and desperately to reduce them, but I'm very content with additional.
Councillor Parker.
I wish.
The only one thing I have concern about, Chair, was I just felt the wording was a little bit loose over apply the reserve funds, and I don't think that's just perhaps just too general.
Could Councillor Parker help me with that? I mean, as a financial expert, which I'm not, what would you...
I think in general, I mean, from my belief, and I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Gardner, is I think the general principle is there that we want to explore it. We want to explore funds that are available. I wouldn't want to get too prescriptive as to exactly what we should or should not be doing, or as to what we agree or do not disagree with. I think if we could ask them to consider and take this forward and respond back to us, I certainly wouldn't want to get too prescriptive. I'll just come to Councillor Gardner first, because he was...
Thank you. I agree with the point on the generality that we should leave it open, but I would like to actually put a bit of a deadline on this, not for the work to be done, but for a response from the portfolio holder to tell us, A, that the work will be done and when it will be done.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor James.
The prescriptive bit, I think, is that we have a policy that says we're going to meet and we're going to build 300 units, and we have lots of money, and it's how we're going to achieve that target. Clearly, from a monitoring point of view, we didn't. And what we want to know is, Cabinet Member for Housing, how are you going to achieve this? We have land that we own ourselves. What are we going to do to achieve that?
Indeed, and I think that's essentially the essence of what we want here, is them to explore this and come back to us. I don't, as I say, that was my point around being prescriptive and determining what fund they should look at. In an ideal world, we'd be looking at everything and anything in order for this to happen. I know the portfolio holder is already doing a lot of work around this, to exploring new ways of meeting our affordable housing. So if we can move on from this after Councillor Harvey's point, I would be very keen to capture the words, and then we can move on to the next agenda item.
Thank
Councillor
you,
Harvey.
It was interesting, the debate at Arga over the money, and colleagues here who were at that meeting will attest indeed as well. I really came to the Section 106 report that was presented to Arga was the point about the process issue of the money. That's one element that committee needs to deal with in Park. From an action point of view, Chair, the other aspect of this that we've not really, I don't know whether you have discussed or not discussed, is the issue of the sites. It's all well and good abstract, having a nice policy that says we're going to spend £1.5 million building affordable homes and we're going to do it this way. Actually, right here, right now, there are planning applications and planning scoping exercises going on for particular sites in the town and around the town that would deliver significant proportions of affordable housing. And the one in my mind is Eli Lilly. It's the largest single site in the town. It will be the largest single site coming forward for some time in the context of potential development. Now, while a developer like Sentinel are scoping that, I would like to see the Cabinet Member actively looking at using the resource that's available to achieve delivery on that site. We've got Merton Rise. So where does the county, like Councillor Cubitt say, actually fit in with that? So I don't wish to detract from anything anybody said, but we don't want it just to be a piece of abstract work of let's have a nice policy and a set of criteria of how we're going to spend the money, because we've got that and we haven't spent it. But there are genuine opportunities that are now, and that train is leaving the station. And if we're not on it, we'll be left here in 18 months again saying, well, I'm terribly sorry, but we've still got 744 grand we haven't spent. The other issue, Chair, is that that money is time limited. If we don't spend it, the developer will have every right to say, you have not fulfilled your legal aspect of your section 106, I'll have it back, thank you very much.
Okay. So, if we capture these words, yeah? Okay, so if we can move forward, I think there's committee. I think we have the agreement. This is what we want. I think we just need those words. And as I say, that makes the point completely that there are other aspects of this, and if we get too specific in our request, we might get something we wasn't expecting. I think we need to keep it open to the person. Can we get the wording, please, so we can move on from this item and capture that here? Councillor Parker.
Just to say that we've agreed amongst ourselves, which we will share with you now, a revised wording.
Thank you.
I mean, so as not to bore you with all of it, Chairman, I mean, or do you want the whole lot? Okay, again? I didn't know, sorry, I didn't. Okay. P&I notes a significant decrease in the completion of affordable housing, currently representing only 9% of the total. I will pass them. Could I? Yeah, of course.
Do we want to take it sentence by sentence and just agree that?
Hard. Okay.
Okay.
Despite assumptions that affordable housing completions will improve into the next monitoring period, P&I requests the portfolio holder for housing to speedily undertake a piece of work. Now, in this regard, I think, taking Councillor Gardner's point, I mean, we can put a supplementary note somewhere saying we would like that to be done by end of January. Is that what we're looking at? Sorry.
I think the point was to report back on how quickly you can get it back, was it not?
Yeah, it was. I'll get a response from the portfolio holder saying that it will be done and when it will be done.
Yes.
Thank you for that. So I think we're content with that. Identifying issues giving rise to the low level of delivery of affordable housing, and investigate, this is the word that I think I've agreed with Stuart, if nobody else, the delivery of affordable housing using allocated stroke reserve funds. I mean, we could detail that more if you wish. To support the established and agreed target of 300 affordable units per annum. As I say, again, a supplementary note if those better advised than me want to put which funds we're talking about beyond the... Okay, no, that's fine. I mean, I'm seeking to get consensus on this. So is that okay?
Could I just point out there's a split infinitive. It should say to investigate speedily.
It's a bit ironic because I'm really normally such a stickler for split infinitive. Well, that's nearly as bad to say it's trajectory, isn't it? But you know, I'm happy to be re-advised on that. I hate them, so we'll take that out. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if we could pass that down to us now. Is the committee, is there general agreement on this? Yes. Thank you.
Just in terms of general comments on the AMR, I think that in general there were a number of comments on some details that people would like to see in the next version of the report. So some elaboration around issues about 40% affordable housing and which schemes delivered what. We've got a clear view on that. I think we had some questions, just some general points of clarity which we will pick up on the report prior to publishing it. We had, I was trying to rack my brains now. Any other points? Yeah, you.
I said as a part of appendices that we ought to have the natural environment, you know, the built and natural environment that goes elsewhere, but I know it's not part of this piece, but it's just having some of this as background papers.
So
Just that I made a formal recorded request that I don't accept projected figures and the land supply and your very pessimistic take on already authorised planning applications in our borough.
Okay, that's a single comment, an individual comment. We only note the views of committee, not individual comments.
If I make a formal request for my comment to be recorded, you are you are in fact permitted, and that's why I use the word formal. I'm formally requiring committee services to make sure that it's registered that Council Cubitt does not accept your extremely pessimistic projections on land supply, because you have total applications approved of 5284. You've lost a couple of sites, and your interpretations, therefore, because we only need, even on your most pessimistic scenario, we need 4,091 houses for the next 5 years, and we've got formal applications already for
Councillor Cubitt,
5,284. But yeah, I'm not sure that everybody
as your
really
formal
appreciates that.
as your formal request, I do believe it's been captured. Thank you. Yes, Councillor.
Can I just ask, the point that's been raised by Councillor Cubitt in the manner that she has done now, is there an answer the officer can give, just for the purposes of us understanding that her objection?
I think we've given it in the fact that we don't agree on that point. I mean, this is done in an agreed way with county based on a number of different data sources. In terms of the sites that aren't going to come forward, you've got sites such as Southview, Aldermaston Road Triangle, which is a reduced capacity, land north of Park Pruitt, which is a reduced capacity. Those are factual elements as far as officers are really concerned. So that is why the numbers are as high as they are in terms of sites that aren't going to be delivered. The 653 is not being delivered. There's reasoning for each of those sites why they're not going to come forward.
Actually, if you drill down on the figures, there are a couple that are not being taken forward, such as the allotments, which have still not been decommissioned, so you're not permitted to build them and never were. But actually, if you drill down to the figures, the reason why there's such a disconnect between the 5,284, of which most of those planning applications were approved for an end of plan of 2008, I think, okay, is because you've taken a very negative view on the delivery rates. And it's in the developer's interests to be extremely, to downplay the delivery rates before a borough council is about to approve their planning figures, number one. Number two, you've made frequent references to Hampshire County Council. I don't understand, we're the planning authority, not Hampshire County Council, what the relevance is as to why you keep on talking about Hampshire County Council agreeing with our projected delivery rates. It's very peculiar, because most of these sites aren't Hampshire County Council sites.
I think Joe made the point before that we do all our monitoring with Hampshire County Council. We apply the same methodology as across the piece, so all of the Hampshire authorities do it in that way. Our methodology is one which is tried, tested and very tested appeal examination, and is not pessimistic. It's actually a very optimistic position, and it's based on fact and evidence which officers, collect on the behalf of the council.
And I believe you have a... Okay, Councillor Tucker.
It's just something that occurred to me regarding the planning permissions granted for loss of sites in employment use, and that's page 41. These are just examples, because I noticed it in other places. For instance, you've got a new use of a veterinary surgery, and it was a sorting office. Well, you're not really losing a site for employment if one was a sorting office and now it's going to be a vet's. I don't understand what the criteria is as to Can you see where I'm coming from?
It's because it's moved out of the use class, use class, which is offices, warehousing, etc., all different types of employment.
Thank you. We are exactly doing that, moving to the recommendation now. I think for the most part, I think we've had
We were told tonight that the report says it's a 3.3 housing land supply, and now it says it's a 3.8. Is this an annual? How does that change? So if some of those sites that are in for appeal come in, at what point does that figure change? When do you? I mean, do we have to wait a whole year for it to be another 5-year, or is it a moving feast and you can come back 2 months later and tell us we have a 5-year housing land supply? I don't wonder how it works. I don't quite understand.
We have to do this annually, so it always sets out a position as of the 1st of April, and the AMR has to do that, which is why that figure is in there. We've updated the figures because we needed to for an appeal. If there are future appeals, then we will do it for that, so there's an up-to-date position, and we would do it for the local plan examination, for example, if we need an up-to-date position.
Thank you. We have finished on that point.
So we're so vulnerable to development. If we don't do it quarterly or more often, if it changes, once we actually reach 5 years, I think it's essential that this council understands that we've reached that. You know, if we ever get there, I think it's, you know.
When the policy team is commenting on applications, we will provide an up-to-date land supply position at that point.
Okay. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt because you came late. You can have one comment, and I'm going to move the recommendation because we've had nearly 2 hours on this.
It's a very quick comment. In the tables at the back, we have listed Eli Lilly, and it states 620 units. What I'd like to draw to the attention of the officers is their justification for that is the scoping report. My concern is that our officers at planning went back on the scoping report and said that that wasn't acceptable. So the 620 figure that you're listing here shouldn't be listed, particularly when they're now looking at a much reduced figure. Could I encourage you to go look at that? Because I don't want to give them sucker by them having a report here that justifies 620 when we're looking at something quite different somewhere else. Sorry, Chair, a very small point to take away and deal with somewhere else.
It should be because it reflects the position as of the 1st of April. We're aware that things have changed since.
Okay. Okay, we're going to move the recommendation now that we know, and we have made comments. They have been captured. Has everybody agreed to the recommendation? Thank you. We are now moving to paper B. Thank you very much, Joe. And this will be presented by Rachel White and Jamie Preston. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report comes to the Planning and Infrastructure Committee for comment and hopefully for your support and endorsement of the recommendations, which are to support the need for the review of conservation area appraisals and development management plans as necessary, endorse the prioritisation methodology and the conclusions of the desktop review as set out in the prioritisation list at Appendix 2, and to endorse the approach to consultation and adoption for taking forward a programme of conservation area reviews. The background sort of gives the general background in terms of local authority statutory duty and non-statutory duty in relation to conservation areas. At present we have 47 conservation areas within the borough, all of which have a conservation area appraisal, but none of which currently have a management plan. The conservation area appraisals are now out of date in accordance with best practice as defined by English Heritage, which says that appraisals should be no more than 5 years old. Our appraisals all date from 2004, with the exception of one for Southview, which was done more recently. The report sets out the approach that has been taken to prioritising how to undertake a programme of reviews for all 47 conservation areas. The approach has been based on identifying those conservation areas that are at greatest risk from development and or have suffered from the greatest level of change and therefore potentially harm to their character and appearance. The methodology also takes account of the level of inaccuracy in the existing conservation area appraisal documents, and that methodology has been used as a desk-based assessment to inform a prioritisation list which is accompanying the report.
Okay, actually have Councillor John Lake. Did you wish to speak?
I want to ask to make sure that parish councils and community associations in the areas where there are conservation areas will be consulted as part of this process, because I think that's absolutely vital. What we don't want is people just wandering around and producing a plan without consulting those who perhaps know. I know you know a lot about the conservation areas, but it seems important that those who live in them actually have the right to comment at a very early stage. But I am slightly concerned about how much this is all going to cost and what benefit there's going to be. To my view, I draw your attention to a statement on paragraph 70 of 77, which says, for instance, Sherburn St John has a high score for the level of development since designation. Now, I've been the member for Sherburn St John since 2000, and although I bang on about all the development in and around Sherburn St John, I can actually assure you there's hardly been a single house built in the village of Sherburn St John during that period. So, contrary to what it says, there hasn't been any development that would have affected the conservation area since 2004, certainly. Yes, there's been an awful lot of development in the parish of Sherburn St John, because Merton Rise and Marnell Park and Northern Marnell Park and Rooksdown and everywhere else were all originally in Sherburn St John, but in the conservation area, I think you'll find there's been absolutely no development since 2004. And I am concerned that we're embarking on something that could be quite expensive without, well, I realise it's going to be a desktop study and you may quickly find that actually there isn't much to change, but I am concerned that we're embarking on an expensive exercise unnecessarily. I mean, I am surprised that we don't mark up the conservation area maps for any new development, because you obviously comment on all development, so therefore you must know already what has happened in the conservation areas. And it's just a matter of keeping those up to date and just marking them, and then perhaps walking around and just checking that your map's correct. This seems to be a sledgehammer to crack a very small nut, and I just question why it's necessary. Thank you.
There's a number of points there, Councillor Leake. If I'll address each one as they arise, if that's okay. The cost-benefit argument that you raise is a valid one. The risks of not undertaking a review are set out in paragraph 7.2 of the report on page 64 of 77. In terms of the cost, that is yet to be determined. We have Jamie Preston, our conservation area appraisals officer, with us for a year on a part-time basis, and that is to set up how we would take forward a programme of review. So that is still to be determined. What we are intending to do is to undertake some time recording as part of the pilot study that is being proposed now for Basingstoke Town, to determine how many officer hours it would take to produce one conservation area appraisal review, management plan, etc., and take that through the whole consultation process. And on that basis, we will then have some information on which to present both to this committee and to Cabinet to say how we could set out a number of options of how we could take forward a programme of reviews. In terms of your comment regarding the parish councils, the proposed consultation and adoption methodology at Appendix 3 does say at paragraph 2.1 stakeholder consultation, quite happy to make that explicit to include parish councils. It clearly was the intention that the local community would be obviously involved as part of the public consultation, but certainly local ward members and parish councils could be included there. So more than happy to amend that paragraph to include that. The point about since 2004, what we're actually looking at is since designation. Although the appraisal documents were produced in 2004, the majority of those didn't include any review. Now, because some of the older conservation areas that we've got, such as Kingsclear, are nearly 40 years old, there's a 40-year time gap that we're talking about since the date of designation to now, with no review, in which time there has been obviously significant development and potentially significant change. So it's not that just we're talking about backtracking to 2004, it's that we're talking about backtracking to the date of designation, because as I say, there has been no formal review process of all the conservation areas since that time. I hope that answers your questions.
I mean, Kingsclear is another example of an area where there hasn't been much development. I mean, I'm, again, not aware of... I look at Councillor Mrs. Tucker, she knows the area better than most. It just seems to me that there is an assumption that there has been a lot of development, and yet I suggested that the maps should have been kept up to date. Every time there was a development, because you're consulted, you'll know where it is. And I just question the wisdom of spending what is undoubtedly a lot of money on this exercise, but I'm just a retiring member.
Okay. Councillor Cubitt, please.
You've only just stood for election. How can you be a retiring member? Okay, just very, very quickly, I completely agree with Councillor Leake on the matter of parish councils. So I'm really glad to hear you're going to make a very explicit statement in your flowchart that the parish council will be consulted before the final version is then produced for the public. And I would very much urge that whatever comes back from parish council is taken into account before it then moves to the next phase of consultation. Secondly, what I would like formally to record as Councillor Cubitt is that the statement in Appendix 5 on Old Basing implies predetermined results, which I'm not happy about, and nor are a number of my residents. Specifically, suggestion that there's been a deterioration in the conservation area in specific relation to Piatt's Hill, and of course we've got some very important archaeological sites there, and therefore I'd like to record that I do not accept the statement on Old Basing. Thank you.
Councillor Potter, please.
Just as an aside, Chairman, I mean, I did note with interest the comments on Old Basing and thought how interested the residents there would be with the priority being placed upon that particular area. But I wanted just to refer you, if I may, Chairman, to page 70 of 77 under the other considerations. And it's really, if I can say it, the use of the language that we use in these reports. It's a particular point I make. I've made it elsewhere about the same issue, but this is the relationship between Manidan, the major site, and Worting Conservation Area. And you as a Winkelbury councillor, Chairman, will have some interest in this, I know, and I don't say this is historical reference to your language, but it certainly is your colleague ward councillor, and the use of the language he uses about Manidan being this threat to Winkelbury residents and having to protect them from the worst parts of the Manidan development, which we've always described, I think. This is land that we own, by the way, or partly own, and we've said what an exemplary development this is going to be, and it's going to coalesce with adjoining areas, all the rest of it. And yet in this document we talk about it perhaps, what we say here, don't we, Worting Conservation Area. Worting has the lowest score of the medium group, but as a result of the potential threat from development, pressure should be considered as a higher priority. Now, I mean, I would want to think, if we are true to what we are saying in respect of Manidan, I know I say this repeatedly, if we are going to have this exemplary development, which is going to coalesce with adjoining areas such as Worting Village, we would advance the claim for that and not be saying this represents a threat to existing areas and we have to reassess what we say in regard to the conservation area itself. And I think that just sends out the wrong message. I really would want what we say there to be far more positive rather than the negative aspects of this. And I just ask officers, I think, to think about the language that we use in such documents, public documents, which send out the wrong message. We are going to be consulting with these adjoining residents, yours included, by the way, Chairman, in due course, I hope, selling the positive aspects of Malidan, which we will need desperately in our 5-year land supply. And I don't want it to be seen as this possible threat on existing communities, just the opposite.
Thank you. I'm not sure there was a question there for you to respond to. So, yeah. Councillor Watts, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 2 questions, and then I've got quite a lot of comments. First question is, I think I've misunderstood what seemed to me to be a problem. We have on the... I can't now find the reference. The scoring policy, anyway, that... yes, I've got it found. Date designated on page 67 of 77. Higher scores are given for earlier designations. Conservation areas that were designated 70s are given a score of 3, etc. But then we say, where conservation areas have been reviewed, the score will refer to the date of the review. Now, I had to interpret that as being definitive for everything else that was said about the designated date. Is that correct, or what the officer said recently seems to indicate that's not the case? The review hasn't become the designated date when we're talking about the specific areas. Is that right? Sorry.
Just in terms of giving a lower score for the review date, that just really shows that the area has been reviewed and the boundary has been reviewed and changes have been made. So therefore, in terms of the accuracy or the up-to-dateness of the conservation area boundary, that is more up-to-date. But in terms of reviewing the degree of change, we still want to look at that in terms of the original designation date.
I had misunderstood that, so I'll have to vary some of what I have to say as I go. The other is something that sends shivers down my spine. On page 69 of 77, we have potential for important areas of development which are the outcome of the evolution of the settlements, such as ... particularly good example of modern movement housing scheme. Can I have that defined, please?
Okay, I mean that really relates to maybe a known architect of the 20th century. So it's 20th century buildings that otherwise might not be considered to be of architectural merit, but where these ones are, and they might be a particular group, a particular development that is particularly well designed and merits its contribution is positive to the conservation area. So that's where we'd look at those.
Include, for example, the 3-storey flat roof block of flats that the conservation officers and the urban design officers wanted to put in Bell Street and Whitchurch, and which happily the Development Control Committee rejected. But I'll move on. Well, that was how it was defended and presented, and indeed the replacement, which is now being built, was opposed for not being that. It's very sad. I'm very much in favour of a conservation area review, and I'm very much in favour of conservation area management plans. And it's very sad that this report has caused some of us who live in or represent conservation areas to react with fear, if not horror. And I very much hope that out of this we can get something much more positive. I'll begin on page 63 of 77. At the top, recommendations for boundary revisions. Now, farther on in the report we can see this, that it's suggested that the answer to a perceived problem is to take something out of the conservation area. Now, I'll remind you that it's in 3.5 and it's throughout this report and it's throughout our policies that the purpose of the conservation area is the preservation and enhancement of conservation areas. It isn't preserving a conservation area to chop bits off. And I hope that our conservation area management plans will come up with enhancements if they're thought to be needed. I'm worried possibly at 4.2 that this desk review says the overall results demonstrate those areas identified as of high priority are consistent with expectations. I'm wondering if that should really say preconceptions, Chairman. Now, yes, again at the top of page 64 of 77, the reference to reductions, which I should want to resist. I should mention my ward has three complete conservation areas and parts of a fourth in it, and I draw all my examples really from that. Now, another word that makes me shiver in paragraph 6.1 on that page is stakeholders. And I look to see who are stakeholders, and I'm pleased to see that ward members are stakeholders, but we're to be consulted after the work's been done. And if we're going to do this, then we, the elected members, are at least deemed to know our wards. And I would want to be involved right from the front, and I think everybody here would, in, first of all, confirming the assessments that have been made that are embodied in here, because we haven't seen the assessments, all we've seen is an arithmetic result. And I'm extremely dubious that some of the data is wrong, as Councillor Leake has already pointed out in his case, and I shall mention some as well. So we, not only we, but all of the ward members, the 60 members of the council, if they've got conservation areas, should be involved right from the beginning through this, bringing the local knowledge. Obviously, I agree with the point about parish councils as well, but first of all, we are the people elected to the local planning authority, and I feel strongly about that. I'm interested in 721, the very bottom of page 64 or 77, currently unidentified positive buildings. Now, I've something more to say about records later, but as was said, one term that was new to me was undesignated heritage assets. And it's a posh way of saying that the conservation officers can make it up as they go along in development control applications. But as a result of that, there must be a record of all of those unlisted heritage assets, and I hope that we can draw on that and that can be made available to the ward members to look at. I can name one in Whitchurch right now. And positive, that's the word I want to see, positive building space and trees. We see on the top of page 65, erosion of character through limited understanding of character areas. Well, I've criticised our conservation officers for being comparatively more occupied with the fabric of buildings than the character of the areas. So I welcome this being here, but this is in the past tense, so it might have been poorly informed development. Well, as I'm a poorly informed councillor, but I do keep in close touch with the people and the areas in my ward, and I very much worry that the conceptions that are going into these are not those that the council at large would want to see applied. Moving on, if I may, to page 67. I've already dealt with the date of designation. I'm now aware what this is. Now, we see the first bullet point of page 67 and 77 is the original designation maps were available, and it's admitted in this report there are no records available. I already knew with regard to the Whitchurch Conservation Area there are no records of the original designation, so nobody knows why the boundary is where it is, and that became a big issue which I might talk about in detail in a moment. When the Harvest Home was demolished, there was no record of why the boundary had been drawn around it to exclude it. And I hesitate, I won't use the term maladministration because I know it upsets the Chief Executive. But the fact that the Council has kept no records of all of this work that's been done over the years, and much earlier than I thought, for Kingsclear, is certainly a dereliction of the duty of administration, in my view. And it's not only in conservation, it's in planning generally and in many other things. We are in a bad state, and that's why we need to get together all the knowledge that exists about the conservation area, because we don't even know why the boundary is where it is, or why particular buildings are in there. Not all the original designation maps survive, it says. Well, that's a shame. So now we're established that it is in fact the original designation that's applied here, and the degree of change since then. Surely we can draw on the reviews that have been done. The Whitchurch Conservation Area was reviewed in 1999, but the associated map is later than that. So I'm sure that there must be materials that we can look at. And when I say we, I'm expecting as the members that we will be looking at it with the officers on this. Right. Yes, we have on page 69 of 77, third bullet point, changes due to an unexplained inclusion in the wider setting. Well, it's bound to be unexplained if we've thrown away the records, isn't it? I'm worried. Let's move on. If I can move straight on now to page 74 of 77. This is where the ward members are listed as being consultees after the event. And the first word on that page is following completion, and I think it's before we begin that we all need to be involved in that. Possibly coming close to finally, Councillor Leake has talked about the wrong references to Sherborne St John. I know nothing about the Basingstoke town conservation area, I can't comment on that, but a Whitchurch. I now know that it's correct that backland developments ranging from 2 to 26 units will be built since designation. But they have been granted planning permission by this council under policies that say they should preserve or enhance the character of the conservation area. I've actually brought the Whitchurch Conservation Area appraisal, but I won't read it all to you. But the most recent development there, because I've lived in the Whitchurch Conservation Area since 1991, is not slated in here. I think it's better than this says. And the suggestion that the fact it's there is now a reason for a potential boundary revision, I think is abysmal. It may have been, of course, it was a group of elected members who decided to give it consent. And perhaps that's got to be put right, but Councillor Mrs Baker, not able to be here, she did point out that the development mentioned at the bottom of page 76 of 77, Glebe Meadow, was built in 1980. She again thought that since the previous review that nothing had changed. I don't know what the original designation date was, but I doubt the data. I mean, I can question this data. I doubt the data on which this numerical scoring has been done. We haven't seen the calculations, whether it is acceptable or not. And I would like this report to be taken away and for a report that's more positive and that lays out in detail the data that's been used for developing our criteria and sets out a programme that begins for each conservation area with involvement of the elected members.
Again, I don't believe there was any questions. I think it was mostly comments, and the first question was answered.
Well, two questions, and I then got into my stride.
Moving on to Councillor Gardner, please. Thank you.
Switch mics. On page 75, 4, we use the word consultation, and I tend to treat the word consultation with a certain amount of suspicion because it means whatever you want it to mean. I think it's important that we not consult but actively involve the parish councils and the various conservation associations which exist in the rural areas and in the town in producing the draft, then run it through them on a consultation basis, then produce a document for the general public to fine-tune. But let's get it right early on. Let's not send it out to consultation and then find we've got it wrong. So I think we do need to involve the local people. And I think local councils, because there are more people on them, probably do know more than the ward members. So while the ward members should be involved, let's not downplay the role of the parish councils. Now, there's been mention of Whitchurch, and I would like to think that in view of the length of time that Councillor Watts has been living in the conservation area, that he will be considered to be one of the assets to be subject to conservation.
One of the assets. Stop. Put a full stop there.
And lastly, on page 69, there's reference to potential omission of important trees. Well, trees do grow. What may not have been important once may be important now, and what was important may no longer be there because trees die, they get blown over in the storms. So there is a need to update for normal change.
Again, no questions. That's good. I think we're kind of into comments as well at the same time. We're capturing it as we go. Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Two areas I just wanted to push with the officers, and they're both related. In terms of the design-led aspect of the conservation areas, and the security of design, the security of the integrity of the conservation area, if you like, what I'd like to try to understand in terms of the character areas, and then we've got them or haven't got them, the depth of analysis in them and how good they are really, at the security of a planning application coming forward in a conservation area or adjacent to a conservation area. What work would you envisage going on in a review to embellish, support, enhance a conservation area's ability through a design-led aspect to defend the integrity of what you identify, the integrity of the area? And in terms of the other aspect to it, really, it's, where on the modelling and the scoring do we look at the threat posed by a planning application to a conservation area? Where is it, do we do any analysis at all at a conservation area's potential weakness with regard to significant planning applications? Because one thing I've noted is the number of apps that, in a sense, obviously we're saying we've built X here, now we need to redraw the boundary because we've built X here. And it's just this notion of, well, we shouldn't be doing that in the first place if the conservation area was strong enough to say you shouldn't be doing that. And the design-led approach was, if you do something, it should be along these lines. And I'm conscious it's also adjacent to, and not just within conservation areas. I'd really appreciate some thoughts around that, really. If I've misunderstood it, is it in here? And if it is, brilliant. If it isn't, can we put it in?
A lot of that would actually come out of the review process itself, to be honest, because all this is setting out is an approach to a programme of reviews. No reviews have been done yet, and contrary to any misconception that the report may have put out, for which I apologise, there are no preconceptions about any emissions, extensions, etc. with any of the conservation areas, but those two questions that you raised would come out of that review process. So in terms of character areas, what they would allow you to do is to very clearly define what is special about an area. And for example, I'm going to take Church Street and Basingstoke because I'm assuming that's something that's familiar to all of us. That would probably form part of a wider character area, but it's very different to the marketplace because it's got a much more intimate character. It's things like the scale of the buildings, the width of the street, the width of the building plots, as well as sort of prominent materials and all those sorts of things that we would look at. And that sort of level of detail will be applied to every character area within each conservation area, and that gives you a very specific feel for what is important and what defines the character of that area. What that then means is that when we come to appeal, if something would be harmful to that character, not necessarily different but harmful, we have a much stronger basis on which to defend it at appeal. So that's the importance of character areas. In terms of scoring and the threat posed by individual planning permissions, that's not something that we've been able to look at specifically within this document, because as I say, this is proposing an approach to how we would take forward a programme of reviews. You're quite right in that the development that has taken place so far should have complied with planning policy and therefore should have preserved and enhanced, but we know that that's not always the case for a variety of reasons. If in undertaking the review process we come across particular issues within conservation areas where for whatever reason the development has been harmful, what can be done and what is envisaged is that within a management plan that would be one of the issues that would be identified, that would be brought up by the review process. For instance, if buildings in one particular conservation area haven't respected the urban grain, or they haven't respected the local vernacular, or they haven't respected the height, those specific things can be brought out within a management plan, and what that management plan can do is put specific policies in place that are tailored to an individual conservation area to say this harm has occurred. In order to prevent this harm reoccurring, this policy is going to apply to this particular conservation area.
Thank you, and that's really important. The context that I've got in mind is twofold. Firstly, in terms of this is going to take some time, therefore what's the integrity of our existing conservation areas in picking those themes up? I'm just thinking that through now as a ward member with a conservation area, how does that relate to Southview and so on? So I need to think that through, and we'll take that offline with you, I think, in terms of the implications for the existing conservation areas. But then if you look at your Appendix 2 and your timetabling, the reason why I raised the issue, particularly around the planning applications, is, for example, Bramley is down the bottom in Tranche 5. Now we know that Bramley is going to see significant development take place if all, according to the local plan, is fulfilled. What I don't know and what I can't tell from this is whether or not if Bramley was in Tranche 1, your review and action on the conservation area would help deal with issues associated with development in Bramley because you're reviewing the conservation area up front. Is that notion of, that the planning world lives in this bit, you're doing the conservation area in this bit, and some of our communities are going to be coming under considerable pressure. And I think, I would imagine Bramley would quite like to see its conservation area renewed to enable itself to protect itself in some way. Similarly, so Old Basing. And also the reverse applies. That if you get a review of a particular area, for example, Old Basing, and it is the community-led and it comes from councils and parish-led, that's fine. If somebody else decides to get involved as a stakeholder locally, what I would be concerned at is that it detracts from the residents, the parishes, and the councillors. And I don't want to see developers and other people get their oar in and saying, we should be doing this with the conservation area or that with the conservation area. And I think we just need to be aware of that. It's difficult for you as an officer to deal with that because you're going to get consultation responses. So I'm just conscious you need to think, I think, how you deal with what is a legitimate consultation response. And if it's Taylor Wimpey saying, I quite like Old Basing's conservation area reduced, that would set the alarm bells ringing. And similarly say with Bramley and so on. That's the reason for my question, really. It's just the context in which all of this sits with the bigger political picture that we're seeing develop now. Brilliant report, really good piece of work. I really do support you in what you're doing. It's just seeing that bigger picture that I'm driving at, Chair.
Just to try and set it in the context of the bigger picture a little bit, it was literally that we have Jamie's post for a year, and this is something that we can do. We can set in issue a programme of reviews, and all this report was aiming to do was to try and say if that review is to go forward, how do we prioritise the conservation areas that we're looking at first? The basis on which we took that approach was to try and identify through a scoring system those conservation areas that were at the greatest risk from potential change or from potential harm, and that is solely looking at it in the context of the legislation in relation to conservation areas, and that conservation areas are an area of architectural and historic interest, the character and appearance of which it is desirable to preserve and enhance, and that's the basis on which we're coming from.
Can I just support what Councillor Harvey's just said, because I do agree. I mean, Bramley really is an area and that is likely to suffer, and in my view, should be actually well ahead of Sherburn St John. And I mean, the residents of Sherburn St John probably kick me, but there isn't any great concern in certain areas, and we could actually tell the officers where our concerns are, and without this point score, I'm sure we could all come up with a different list of priorities.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Are we questions in and then a bit of debate following, or are we going to have a debate after?
I think it's questions and comments. I think if there's
Okay.
if we feel a need for debate once we've heard our comments, then
Okay. First, one question I'd like to ask. The conservation officer mentioned that we have a Jamie's post for 12 months. But but I'd like to ask to support Jamie. How many other conservation officers do we have?
Nobody is supporting Jamie in this role other than me as directly line managing and helping to see the project. This is a project that is solely being done under the Conservation Area Appraisals Officer post.
Well, there lies the problem, of course, as far as when we hear the comments that are being made by members around this table, Chair, is that I've been pushing for a management plan for the Top of Town Conservation Area, I think probably for 3 or more years, because that's been the big error. If there's been any error, the big error has been an administrative one, and this isn't any comment to existing officers. It's not intended to be, but at some stage we lost sight of the fact that we were designating all of these conservation areas, but we weren't putting behind them the policy that would support them. So that's how we've ended up where we are right now, where we've got situations where inappropriate development's been allowed to happen, changes to buildings has come about that has, to some degree, substantial, certainly in areas of the town centre map, eroded the effect and the sort of benefit of conservation area. And I think maybe we're perhaps going to have to take a pragmatic view to some of this and redesignate. I want to say that I just don't think that there is sufficient staff to do the job we would want as ward councillors. I would want to be engaged. I don't want to be part of a consultation period for 2 weeks, to have just that opportunity, have a lot of information provided to me from the desktop assessment that's been done, for me then to try and get about and around the ward and try and agree to everything that's being recommended. I think the point's been made. It involves officers going on walkabout with the ward members to say this is what we think, this is what, in the same way to some extent when the work was done originally to designate a conservation area. So we're really trying to play catch up here, and I just don't think in the sense of staffing levels this council's committed to it, and that you can't then say that it's a problem of staff, it's a problem of lack of staff. I worry when we look at situations where there's a suggestion that there's been an error in designating an open space, green open spaces, because I'd want to defend any green open space within my ward, and I can't see how that's any designating that within a conservation. I can't see a problem with it. I do have reservations with regard to the situation that we've got now, and the reason why we are here is because we've got a weak planning control, and we've got we actually enforce reactively, not proactively, when you put in a suggestion that there's been something contrary to the conservation, or we're asking for enforcement, there's a priority now, and often the response back comes, this is due to capacity, I think that's the word used, this is low priority. But we're looking at a report and we're looking for something that is far outside. Our expectations, I think, as ward members, are going to exceed the capabilities of the officers to deliver. And I think that's what needs to be assessed. What needs to be assessed is the appropriate resources being put and given to the officers to do the work to the degree that it needs to be done. I don't think it is, and that's not criticism of officers, not at this level anyway.
Okay, thank you. I think we've captured the comments. I've got 3 more people who'd like to either ask questions or make comments. That's the way we're going. I'm conscious that it's 9 o'clock, and if there is a desire for debate following this, which I kind of we'll have to wait and see. So I'd like to move on as swiftly as possible. So if we do have points to make, perhaps we could make them as swiftly as possible and as concisely as we can. But I do thank everybody for their detailed comments. Thank you. Councillor David Leaks.
Thank you. This is probably the quickest one going. On the consultations of stakeholder on page 74, could you add the words TADS to that, please?
Could you just repeat the word, please? Could you just repeat?
TADS, T-A-D-S, Tadleian District History Society.
Thank you. It's page 74, yeah. Okay, we've got Councillor Keith. What's next, please?
Yes, something Councillor Parker said reminded me of a point I didn't make. At the top of page 63 of 77, a consideration of the potential for serving Article 4 directions to restrict permitted development rights for works that could threaten the character of an area can be made. Well, we had a test case less than 2 years ago. The inn known as the Harvest Home in Whitchurch, which was a building of local interest, a bolly, and right on the boundary of the conservation area, therefore affecting its setting, was threatened, and an attempt was made to persuade the cabinet of this council to serve an Article 4 direction. It was a very interesting cabinet meeting because I spoke in much the same way as I spoke a few minutes ago, and one member of the cabinet was nodding furiously throughout what I had to say, and then the cabinet unanimously agreed that they weren't going to make an Article 4 direction because they were advised there was a risk that the council would have to pay compensation for the loss of permitted development rights. There isn't any point going down this path while we've got a lily-livered, weak administration that's not prepared to do this. This shouldn't be in here if it's not going to be within the policy of the council to use this to protect our assets. And when there's a debate, I'd like to just formalise my proposition.
Just to clarify for members on the Article 4, the Article 4 that was in question on Harvest Home was at what that time was called an Article 4.1, and that was in relation to demolition. The Article 4s that we're talking about here, the Article 4.1s and Article 4.2s have now been merged. They're just generally called Article 4s. But at that time they were split. They both dealt with the removal of permitted development rights, but the type of Article 4s that we predominantly use in conservation areas, because all buildings within conservation areas over a certain size require planning permission for their demolition. Demolition is controlled within conservation areas. So the sort of Article 4s that we're talking about here remove small-scale permitted development rights, and they're the ones that we've put in place in Brookvale, Fairfields and Southview. So they remove things like permitted development rights to change doors, windows, add porches, change walls, that sort of thing. So they are fundamentally different to the case as was at Harvest Home, because that issue of demolition is not an issue on buildings within conservation areas, just for clarity.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair. I might want to defer here to Councillor Watts as well, because I was going to move a recommendation. I think we're thinking along the same lines here, actually, in terms of the resources and the issues here to complete the work that needs to be done, because I think there's comment around the table firmly unified in respect of the need to see this work done. So I would like to see a recommendation that the resources and staffing are made available to fulfil the conservation area review, and our concern registered as a committee at the staffing levels in the planning department, and in particular in regard to the conservation team to complete the work. And that should be something that is put forward to the budget that is coming forward in this February coming. We should make a recommendation to that effect as a committee to the Cabinet, that they should find the money in the budget to do the job that's required and to employ the staff and to resource the conservation area review. And in doing so, acknowledge our concern about the staffing levels. It's the two things I'm after.
Okay. Well, can we deal with that at the end? Because we have a couple more, one more question, and then perhaps Councillor Watts may want to make a comment, and then we'll come back to you. Okay, Mrs. Tucker.
Thank you. Just an assumption, is the pound at Silchester? Yes.
Okay. Short and sweet. Thank you. Councillor Watts, did you want to make any comment on Councillor Harvey's recommendation?
Oh no, I'm very happy to support Councillor Harvey's recommendation. I'd like to make a separate one of mine.
We'll capture Councillor Harvey's first, please. Thank you.
I see first. Well, I'll write it down so you've got it, Andrew. Don't worry. Basically, the committee recommends that the resources, staffing, and capacity are made available to fulfil the conservation review and resource the conservation team properly. We need to resource them properly. And that the committee is concerned at the staffing levels of the planning department and in regard to the conservation team. I want to record the first bullet point effectively saying there is concern from the committee about the staffing levels. The action in the second point is that we want to see them fully resourced. And enforcement as well as it's the staffing levels of the planning department. And then the second point is we want to see the budget, the resources there available to fulfil what's required of the conservation additional.
Okay, thank you. Is that in general agreement with the committee? Yes, it's agreement, thank you. And if you can pass that on to us afterwards, we can make sure we capture the words, please. And Councillor Keith-Watts, I believe you had a further recommendation.
I propose that the first stage of each review should be consultation with the elected borough councillors and parish councils to agree the terms of reference for the review. The first stage is the key.
Councillor Gardner?
I agree with the sentiment, but can we just stop referring to consultation and put in active involvement of?
Okay. And we take this as a agreed comment of the committee. Yes, thank you. So,
I mean, I'm sure the officers have sought to streamline this a little because of the resource implications that they obviously had, which they have encountered thus far. But clearly, if our proposition goes anywhere, they'll have bags of time to do this properly. So that'll be good.
Councillor Cubitt, yes, please.
I'd like the committee to agree that the phrase be removed, that an assessment be undertaken to determine whether there was any historic merit in Park Pale in Old Basing, because that implies predetermination on that matter. I'd like it not to be, I'd like that to be changed, page 76 of 77. Because the implication is it doesn't have sufficient architectural historic merit, which I take offence to. I'm very attached to my Park Pale.
I suggest that my suggestion would deal with that, because that will supersede anything that's here.
Yeah. If we can...
I'm happy for it to be formally recorded that Councillor Cubitt's made that request and leave it at that.
Okay,
and that
thank
it
you.
be rolled into Councillor Watts. But I thank Councillor James for her support.
We'll pick that up under Councillor Keith Watts then, and the active engagement. Thank you. I think we capture the comments with the indulgence of the committee. Do we wish to go into debate, or I think we capture these comments and move forward, shall we? Yes. Do you want to get that? Let's go for the comments first. Is that okay? Yeah. Or is it a specific point? Do you want? No, we're going to hear the comments first. Yeah.
If I just quickly run through these, so we've got actively engaged with parish councils should be included at the start of the process. I was coming to that. Ward members should be involved at the start of the process. There was a point raised by Councillor Watts, and there were some nods around the room that they didn't want to see boundary changes, but no, okay, that was a single comment then. Councillor Gardner's point about needing to update normal change within the conservation areas, including things like trees, where they've changed. General point. Okay. Then we had Councillor Harvey's point about considering the bigger picture and whether we should anticipate anticipated change as a factor for consideration. I think that Councillor Leeks had supported that as well. Okay. And then we have the specific point about the resources. I think that's covered under the general point about where there's anticipated change, places where there would be anticipated change. Well, it's the view of the committee whether if that's the case. I was trying to pick it up in a more general sense.
Could we, Councillor Gardner?
Could you leave it as a general point, but just put in there especially Bramley?
Is that the committee's comments? Agreed? Mr. Parker, please.
There's just one thing I wanted to request is added to the comments, and it's really at the beginning, which was something that I said, was that I welcome the move to introducing management plans for our conservation areas. Yes. I think that's important for mine, as far as I'm concerned. I leave it open to members to agree or not.
I do recall when you said that point, there was plenty of nodding. That was our comments of the committee. And your formal request, which I think has been captured. And Councillor Potter.
Yeah, just indulge me. I mean, I know I made the point about Manida, and I made it, I hope, with good purpose. My only concern was that, and we've used different words, I mean, I recognise the potential development pressures. It's been alluded to in respect to Bramley. It would obviously apply to Manidan as well. But I don't always see it as a threat. I mean, it can obviously be a challenge and one that we have to look at in the context of those concepts. All I ask the officers to do, and I mean, without being facetious, I think I'd like to see Manidan as a conservation area in its own right, but we'll see how we get on with that. But, you know, in all seriousness, I mean, it can be a very symbiotic relationship, I think, where large development abuts a conservation area, and if it's done right, and if the new development is the sort of exemplary stuff we're talking about, it isn't always going to be that threat. And I think we just have to be cautious, really, in the words that we set out in these documents. That was all I was asking for, because the public will read this, will react to it, and I don't want that myth about Maladown continued, quite frankly.
So if we capture something along the lines of where there is development, it doesn't necessarily have to be considered as a threat, but could be a positive influence on the conservation area. Is that the view of the committee? Okay.
Councillor Parker.
Just I wanted to say, because there's been some fairly sort of firm comments in regard to it, and I do just want to say that still I think there's room to say thank you to the officers for the work that they've done in bringing the paper to the table tonight, in what I probably think, with my working with conservation officers within one of the busiest conservation areas, and the attacks on the conservation area, I expect members will agree. I mean, we had Councillor Leake talking about no development happening for 40 years that's affected the conservation area and so forth. That doesn't happen in the town centre map, and I know just how hard they work, and with possibly what I would always consider to be limited resource.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. I think the committee utterly accepts your thanks to the officers for their report, and also their thanks for sticking with us throughout this as well, through to the end, which leads us on, before we leave, on to recommendations. I think we're going to capture recommendations now, if that's okay. So recommendation 1 is to support the need to review the conservation area appraisals and to develop management plans as necessary. Agreed? Thank you. Endorse the prioritisation methodology and the conclusion of the desktop review as set out in the prioritisation list. Okay, we can record a vote against. I'm told yes, Councillor Parker.
Chair, I think it's a difficult one to actually agree in principle openly, because so much of the comment has been about how there's a need to engage more with ward members in regard to building this particular process up. So personally, it doesn't get my vote.
And yes, please.
If the first recommendation was to support the need to review conservation area appraisals, working closely with local communities and seeking the full support of parish councils, because then what you're saying is involving the local who know their own patch, which was the point that Councillor Watts and all of us have been making, and then it's not open to the bigger picture issues that Councillor Harvey alluded to as well, because the drivers then are the locals and not all these mystical people who seem to be given equal weight to the democratic process, and for which I have a big problem with.
I suggest that we perhaps remove number 2 and keep 1 and 3. With 3, endorse the approach to consultation and adoption for taking forward a programme of conservation area review. Obviously, we have made our comments, and they're going to be built into this.
Thank you, Chair. Only as long as the comments of the committee in relation to the engagement of ward members, parish councils, local communities, and possibly if there's any scope for the language to be changed, not to be talking about stakeholders. As long as that's going to have some influence to little 3, that's okay, but not as it stands.
Councillor Gardner?
Can we just add, subject to the comments raised by this committee?
I'm happy with that. I mean, and I do think that the point you've made was probably one of the strongest agreed comments across the whole group. So,
Just in terms of just talking to the officers, the middle one is important to us because there is a methodology there that we've asking members to asked to comment on. It would be useful if you could consider endorsing the methodology in the light of the comments that have been made by the committee, which officers would then need to take away. And because I don't think anyone's saying that the methodology in general isn't right, but there are some aspects of it that we'd like to be pursued.
I'm saying I don't think we judge a methodology just by being given the results, and since I doubt some of the data, we haven't seen the data. I would have thought the first thing that parish councils and ward members might see is the underlying basis that produced that result. So I'm not bothered about the prioritisation methodology. I don't mind Whitchurch being number 2 on the list if we're turning the whole thing into a positive rather than what appeared to be a threat. But I can't possibly endorse it because we haven't seen enough detail to do that. And if we're starting from scratch, it doesn't matter, does it? We've got a list.
okay. So,
Ask a question of process. I mean, in terms of this report and where it goes to from here, either in this form as presented to us or changed with the comments that have been made by the committee, does this go to the portfolio holder or to Cabinet? And in either case, are they obligated to take note of the proposals and changes that we're suggesting, or can they, as I fear has been the case in the past, just ignore it? Can somebody advise me on that process?
We are actually awaiting comments from the portfolio holder at present. It will go to the portfolio holder for planning, and it will also go to Cabinet following that. It is certainly the intention to relay the comments of this committee to both the portfolio holder and to Cabinet.
Now for a compromise. I'm quite happy for 2 to say accepts the priorities as set out in the prioritisation list, without us insisting, at least I would want to insist on a great deal of time to pore over the methodology, but I'm quite happy with the list.
general agreement? Yes? Yeah. Okay.
So in terms of number 2, we had accept the conclusions of the desktop review as set out in the prioritisation list.
Can I confirm the committee's view on that suggestion? Agreed? That we endorse the conclusions of desktop review as set out in the prioritisation list. Agreed? Agreed? Do you want to take a vote on it and we move forward?
Can we record the votes, please?
Yes. If you want your name recorded against, you can comment. So 4, please. These are 4. Point 2, yes. Against? Okay, moving on to point 3. And point 3, I do believe, was agreed earlier, and I'll just read that out just for the sake of the minutes. Endorse the approach to consultation and adoption for taking forward a programme of conservation area review, which was agreed by everybody before point 2. Thank you. So we draw a conclusion to the...
Yeah, Councillor Watts is caught in the comments. In yours, you were going to give us the paper, and we've got the one from the previous item. That's correct.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. We draw a close to the meeting at 9:25 p.m. Thank you.
Can I just say thank you for some wonderful chairing tonight?